Good morning, and welcome to Open Hours for March 22nd, 2012. This is Eric. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good.
Good. We finally got our CDN deployment process finished, or at least it's hopefully finished. We've heard some intermittent, heard tales of some intermittent 404s that we're trying to get all of those resolved. They're a bit of a surprise, but and we apologize if you are having any issues with that. But let us know if you do have any trouble getting any resources from the CDNs, because they should be fully deployed and fully operational at this point. And so if you're having any issues, then we need to go knock some heads. So. Um, but the big news is obviously PR4 is now out. And PR3 is now out, which is suddenly not as interesting news. But what that means is that we are able to deploy, and the gallery pushes will also then recommence starting today or tomorrow. I think Dave said he was going to do a push either today or tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Okay. Well, it's good news anyway, because it's going to be nice to get that, get the gallery updates going on. And then, let's see. I had some other thing about the gallery that I wanted. Oh, yeah, that's right. So, and the gallery push that's going to happen on Friday. At this point, it's looking like Friday, tomorrow, is likely. It's likely to be the gallery tag that is set in 350, the final release of 350. So each of the final releases has a gallery version that's just stamped into the configuration by default, and it's if you don't specify gallery module, or if you don't specify gallery version in the YUI config, then it uses the one that was set. Uses the one that was set at that particular build time. So right now it's looking like the gallery build that's going out on Friday is going to be the one that's stamped into 350 final. But we might end up rolling it to the next. Next week's gallery build, but it's good that everything seems to be back on track now. So let's talk about some of what's in 340, or I'm sorry, not 340, in 350 PR4. The blog post came out. It has links to the actual file, of course. You can get the download, and the change history is out on our wiki, and it's extensive, right? So you can see that. There have been a couple of questions from folks in the IRC channel whether or not there was a convenient way to see what changed from PR2 to PR4, and there really isn't, and there isn't a history roll-up of changes. There are individual tickets that you can see. These two reports here, the tickets addressed in PR3 and the tickets addressed in PR4, are linked there, and they provide some level of detail about what happened, or what changes happened in PR3 and PR4. But between the two releases, between two preview releases, there are about 130 bugs, or 130 tickets, I suppose I should say, addressed. And there's obviously a lot more work in there that wasn't tracked by ongoing tickets, things that we just find in development, or we think, while we're developing, oh, this would be nice too. We'll add that in. So the highlights that I wanted to cover today were a lot of the documentation that's going on staging, which is stage.yuilibrary.com, which you're probably all aware of at this point. But we also have some new use of fonts and things on here. So let us know what you think of the new font faces. Uh, and the major changes being data table obviously has gone through some major work from PR2 to PR3 and PR4. Uploader has also gone through some major work. Both of them have had their current implementation in 3.4.1. That implementation has been now labeled as deprecated, but it is included in as they are included as modules in the 3.5.0 release in parallel to the new versions of the library. So there you'll find in 3.5.0 that there will be a data table module, and there will also be a data table dash deprecated module and a data table dash sort dash deprecated module for if you want to do specific submodule uses for your implementation if you need to use the deprecated module. That being said, for data table, it seems at least, I don't know for specific uploader implementations, but for data table at least, it seems that people have not had too much trouble updating to the new APIs. And as part of the documentation, for data table, I did include a migration guide. So, and also it expanded the documentation for data table pretty expensively. So, but if you are working with 3.4.1 and you want to change over to 3.5.0, either PR4, which I highly encourage people to check out PR4 if you're not already on the preview releases. But there's a migration guide for moving from 3.4.1 to 3.5.0, and it goes over the high-level things that you need to change, some of the things that are most likely to bite you, and then into some more detail about the individual features. A lot changed, obviously, because it was entirely redone, so if I missed something, let me know. What did I miss? File a ticket, and we can get that. I can update the migration guide up, and we can update the documentation asynchronous to releases. So after 3.5.0 goes out, the docs aren't frozen for 3.5.0. We can continue to update the user guides and examples as we move along. And let's see, the other big thing, since we're talking about documentation, I know that Ryan is not here today because he's flying to Australia, where he will be chasing Mosen on the back of a kangaroo with a pie in his hand or something. But he wrote the handlebar documentation, the YDOT handlebars documentation. So this is our wrapper over the handlebars project. And he's pretty proud of the documentation here. It's very thorough. He says that it's actually more thorough than the official handlebars documentation, which is nice, I guess. And but we're definitely pretty excited about the potential that this will have for your implementations.
He added a syntax for the code syntax highlighting, so that handlebars syntax actually highlights correctly, especially when intermixed with HTML. So that's cool. I was happy about that.
Oh, you mean here in the documentation?
Yeah, in those code samples there.
Yeah. Yeah. It was having trouble with that. Okay. That's good. It makes it a lot cleaner.
Luke, you may want to bump up your screen
Oh,
size.
yeah, sorry. So yeah, you can see going into all of the various conditionals and things that you can do, and comment expressions and so on and so forth. So that's really great. And
yeah, there's some good stuff in there to help people get started with the different ways to include templates, either right in their HTML files directly, or have them pre-compiled on the server, and so there's some stuff to get people started with the different approaches there in this guide. So that's definitely stuff that doesn't really exist in the default or the handlebars proper documentation. So.
Right. So so I guess for folks that are new to handlebars, then even if they're not using YUI, then you can point them over to our documentation and they can see at least how the syntax works and if there's something missing in the official documentation. I don't know if we're actually talking to if Ryan has been talking to Yehuda about pulling over some of our documentation or pulling over some of the content in our documentation or translating it over for the official handlebars handlebars docs. The separate
Yeah, I'm
library
not
docs.
sure on that either, if you guys are not.
The fallback plan for today, if there was any deployment issues or for whatever reason, if we were unable to deploy, was that we were going to cover some of the examples that were added in the 350 dev cycle, and Jeff Conniff did a fantastic job revamping a lot of examples and adding a few new ones, and all of them are just beautiful. He actually has design chops, being that being his job, but we as developers are quite satisfied by just putting a box on the screen and saying click here. It is ugly, but the work that he did is fantastic, and we will be. So since we actually have deployment of PR4, we will be talking about that next week, and so definitely join us again next week. But to go over some of the new pretty stuff, you can dig around on the staging site if you want to hunt and peck for them that way. But you might miss them because there are a lot of examples and there were a lot of redone examples, so they aren't showing up as new examples necessarily. But it's good to troll around the staging site anyway to see what you can see. But we definitely want to get your feedback on new documentation in particular, and there is new documentation for data table and for app. You have new docs for app as well, right? For
Yeah,
the transition stuff.
for the transition stuff, and then still filling in blanks on the other stuff. So there's still some more that I want to say, just trying to figure out the best approach to offering some ideas on best practices on how people can structure things. But yeah, the transition stuff is in there. It enables transitions when you're changing from one active view to another, or basically you could think of it as like moving from one page to another. And what Luke's looking at there where his mouse is, there's 3 ways that are baked in for the type of change you're doing. Like if you're going from a page to another page, by default it'll just do a fading transition. But if your views are configured to be in like a hierarchical relationship, for example, the object right above that transitions one that has the views listed, contact and team both have, in this example, both have a parent view of about. So what will happen is, by default, when you're going from the about page to the contact or team page, which is like a child page of that section, it will slide. The new view will slide in from the left, and the old one will slide out to the left. And then if you were to click the back button, things would do the reverse and slide to the right. So that's something that is baked into it. There's the 3 transitions, the fading, slide left, slide right, and it's all based on CSS3 transitions. So we're not trying to do anything for older browsers here, because this is mainly sugar and just better presentation for the newer browsers. And to try to do JavaScript timer-based animations for older browsers would actually make the experience worse for them, like in an IE6 trying to move a huge, basically 2 whole pages at the same time, would not be a great experience. So we decided to to just leave that off and just let them not have transition. So.
But it is. But since it's CSS3 based, it is implemented on mobile browsers, and so if you're viewing it on your phone, how's the experience on the phone and the tablet?
It's good, but the thing is that the more stuff you have in the page, the harder it is to get the transitions to not flicker and be
Mm.
100% smooth. So
Mm. So just be careful of the density of your DOM when you're doing that sort of thing. Is the
yeah,
take.
and hopefully with future releases, as we can get more feedback from people and play with different techniques and different tricks for getting hardware acceleration to work and whatnot, we can try to smooth them out more. One thing I noticed, like jQuery mobile has these types of transitions, and they've actually switched to not transitioning the old and the new pages or views at the same time, and instead do one at a time, probably to help with some of the smoothness. So, uh, but yeah, so the smaller items in the DOM, the much easier the devices can deal with the transitions. The more stuff you add, the harder it gets for it to be as smooth as possible. So.
Now, so what other things are new and interesting from PR2 as far as app is concerned? I know it seems like it's been an awful long time since PR2 came out. But do you remember the more notable things that came out?
Um, let's see. So for Y.app, it's the transition stuff.
Mm.
There, that's the main thing. There was some extra work done to be able to support transitions being an extension to app that gets auto mixed in, and if you're using the Y.app constructor, you can just set the transitions attribute to true, and you'll get the default transition. So it's an opt-in thing. Um,
Mm.
so getting that stuff to be opt-in like that, and also the way that it's overriding the the method which actually switches out the views. So the basic thing is just to remove the old view from the DOM and add the new one in, and either destroy the old view or preserve it if it's set to be preserved. The new way, since it has to do with these transitions, they're inherently asynchronous because they're taking time to complete. So one thing that it now does is it properly deals with rapid calls to show view or switching out the views rapidly. It will go ahead and do the DOM operations to add and remove them, but it will only visually do the transition to the first one in, and then it queues up any other calls that's saying that you want to transition in a new view, and then just transitions the last state basically. So that way you're not having a bunch of things moving around on the page at one time, and you're also not having to wait for all these transitions to complete if there are rapid
Right.
calls
Yeah.
to show view. So that's
Good.
been the main stuff.
We're more interested in responsiveness than we are in fancy transitioning.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're really just some visual sugar, and they do help communicate hierarchy. Like so if you're going from like a conceptual parent to a conceptual child, or the reverse, it's nice to be able to have those transitions to help show that. Especially since if you're not going to the server and everything's already like in memory and JavaScript on the page, you can switch out, from one page to another page very quickly, and somebody may not even notice that it happened. Where because you don't have like the visual like repainting of the entire page and stuff. So, um, but yeah, I'm trying to remember. There is probably a few other things that happened with maybe model and model list. I don't know if you remember any of those. Just might have come up from data table work. But
Well, the the model and model list stuff that came up with the data table is largely related to the change from properties to attributes, but that happened in PR2, didn't it?
yeah, it did.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So besides that, I haven't had any. There wasn't any ground-shaking changes in model and model list that really affected data table development, which is nice. I like having a stable upstream.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we can see actually here in the ticket list that App Framework had just one thing for view, not removing the container when it's destroyed, and then the app transitions. and then otherwise it looks like documentation. So.
Yeah.
But okay, so then it, it seems so anticlimactic to say that's what's new in app.
Well, you can show the GitHub example. The transitions are enabled on it,
I should
and
do
hopefully
that.
they're nice and smooth when you show it.
Yeah. Let's see where to go. Here it is. So this is one of the examples that you might have seen this the last open hours as well, because we were showing this off then. But this is um, the GitHub contributors example is part of the app framework example suite, which the suite of 2 right now, but we're working on adding some more in there. And to Andrew, to your point, we'll look at creating some simpler things, some more getting started stuff. That the getting started stuff, I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe that would be more applicable to user guide content, or would it be more applicable to examples?
Yeah, it probably kind of has to fall into both, and just the more stuff we create, the better.
True.
The problem is like the what's a simple app that we could create, and what I think people may end up wanting is just more of an organizational boilerplate type of example or little project that they can use that shows how these pieces can be put together, than rather trying to like go all out and build a fancy example, which the details may clutter up like the actual organizational stuff that's going on too much. So we've been talking about that sort of thing. If we should create like a boilerplate project to provide one take on how using Y.app and the rest of the app framework MVC components, you could structure kind of the skeleton of an app.
Yeah, it seems like it would be useful. I mean, similar to the base subclass implementation that's linked from the base user guide. There's a link down at the bottom. It's like how to extend and fill that in. So a nice template for you to fill in some stuff, just to have the structure already there for you. Because it might be, it's probably the documentation does a good job of explaining atomically what each little piece is, and maybe how they fit together, but there's sort of a higher level conceptualization of actually seeing an implementation, but an implementation that is so ridiculously simple that it's really just focusing on the infrastructure. I thought the to-do list app was sort of doing that. So, but anyway,
yeah, I think though with the thing is that when people are actually going to be creating stuff with it, they're going to be creating these more complex things. So being able to use like some type of skeleton structure may help them show how they can leverage YUI custom modules and loader configuration, and using models and model lists together with creating view subclasses, but just being like very bare bones and just putting the shell of that stuff out there. But yeah, so that's
yeah, I know that I was really enjoying using model and model list inside of data table. It's really um, encouraging the notion of having that infrastructure piece, a single infrastructure piece, exist across multiple components and have like a single uh, concept or representation of a storage of data or a logical entity in terms of like a business object that we can then we can share between objects in the system, and have you can plug in a particular model that you want to use, or even a model list containing those model instances into data table. And when you're working with the table, you're working with those model instances. And so if you have other objects on the page that are also working with those models, they're sharing those objects, and so the events are being broadcast and so on and so forth. And otherwise, the the hooks for the sync layer, the synchronization layer in model and model list, uh, made it really easy to add that functionality into the data table mutable module, where you can say add row and pass a call uh, pass the data to add row, and then as a second parameter you pass an object with sync true, and that'll automatically pass into the model's sync layer, data sync layer, which will just pass that data up to the server, or based on the implementation of the sync layer that you have in your models. So you can define the business logic local to the objects, the individual business objects themselves. So you have the model that's described this way, and so that model is then represented on the server by this service, or the data in and out having to do with that model are represented here in this model class. And so data table just passes through to the logic inside of your business object. So that's nice, and it feels like practically a freebie. There's a lot more actually that I plan on doing with views in particular, but also a bit with the model and model list relationship in data table in 3.6 as well. That's for the future. But for now, we have. Let's get back to the GitHub's project, and we'll see if these transitions are looking super smooth.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll. It might be tricky for them to actually show up given the delay of Connect, you know.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, there's some frame rate issues, right? So you can see the fade, or at least I can see the fade anyway. I don't know if anybody else is seeing the fade with the frame rate, but fading back. Size on 3. Now it's sliding over. It's fading. So
like what one thing I had in here is like when you go to one of these projects, and then if you click on another if you're about to click on another person's avatar, by default it thinks that you're going back to a user page like Ryan's that you're on here. And so it was sliding, to the right because it was thinking it was like going back to the parent page when in fact it was actually changing which user you were going to. So I wanted to not have that transition, the default one, and it was just because I'm using these generic views, which is a user page view and a repo page view, and the relationship between them is that the repo page view is a child of a user page view. So what was cool is I could just check when in that state, when you're on a project or a repo page and you go to click on another user, I noticed that the user is actually changing. You're not going to just another project for that user or going back. So I can just override the transition and say, oh, in that instance, I want to do a fade instead of the slide.
Yeah, so we faded in that case to a new user.
So it's flexible in that regard, where when you're saying that you want to switch the view by calling the show view method, you can override which transition is being used, or set it to be none, for example.
That's nice that we have that level of configurability. Yeah. Which actually reminds me of the work that you were doing with widget buttons. Do you want to just? I think I'm going to let you share screen so you can go over the changes that happened in button and widget buttons panel.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's see here. Okay, can you see my screen?
It's super small, but yeah.
How about that? Is that bigger?
It's a little better, yeah. It's tiny, but readable on my big monitor anyway.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, I actually wanted to show this code, so.
Yeah, that's readable.
Okay. Yeah, so some work went into widget buttons, and
widget buttons is a class extension, right? That's
yeah,
used
it's a class. Yep, it's a class extension. Right now, Panel's the only thing using it, But the main thing it adds is this buttons attribute, and the idea behind it is it gives support, button support for widgets that use the standard module, the header, body, footer widget extension, and panel, for instance, uses that. So does overlay. So if you were creating like a custom overlay subclass, you could also mix in widget buttons to get the button support. And what we did for 3.5.0 was make widget buttons more awesome and easier to use. Yeah, and basically making it more easy to do the thing it was supposed to do, which is be a nice declarative way to define buttons for your application or for your widget. So what I have here is just a panel. I set header and body content, telling it to render in this test div and center true. But then what I'm doing here is I'm adding buttons and I'm defining it just as an array with a string name of the close button here. And so panel now, people had this problem where they wanted to add extra buttons to a panel, like say in the footer, but they also wanted to retain the close button. So now panel defines this default button, which is close, and it can also be used by name close. So if I run this, it's the same thing. And what this allows me to do is say, oh, well, actually in this panel, I want the section that this button is rendered in the footer. So if I do this, now I have this kind of big close button in the footer. But yeah, so I have this in the footer here.
And that's using the CSS buttons? Or is it using the button instances?
So it's using the button node plugin. So there's now this button node plugin which basically decorates node instances to give them a few extra button-like things. For example, a label. So now I can say like panel get button, and I can reference it by name again. So I can say close and set the label to say foo. And now the button's named foo. I could also, if I wanted to, remove the close button, and it just won't, show up. So how this plugin works is it adds some extra methods and behavior for certain attributes, like the disabled attribute. So if I wanted to say like set label to foo and set disabled to true, now we have this disabled button here. And what the plugin does is it instruments basically the setter for disabled. It not only sets the disabled attribute on this, which happens to be a button HTML element, but it also adds the class YUI3 button disabled, so that way it can be properly styled. So that's some of the stuff that the plugin adds to it. It also adds a factory method, so you can create new buttons. So I could say like panel add button y.plugin button, and it has this create node factory, which I could specify a label bar. This should probably add a bar button to the footer. Oh, and it did. Cool. It should probably just work like this too. Yep. So under the hood, widget buttons is using this button plugin. So if you specify a node that already exists in the DOM, it can use that. The plugin can use that, and then kind of decorate that node instance with the button-specific stuff. And widget buttons will also do that. So one of the things now is that if you provide an HTML structure for your panel that already contains buttons in it, the widget buttons extension will now go ahead and populate, basically your buttons configuration for you using what's already in the DOM there. So that's really nice and handy.
So this progressive enhancement is baked in.
Yeah, so the progressive enhancement, totally baked in. It now works where your buttons stay in place, even if you set the content. So if I say panel, and do this, I now have the content that I set, but my buttons remained. So before, when you would set the footer content, since these buttons exist in the footer content, it would wipe it away. So there was that brought up some problems for people, because then they lost their buttons. So now if you want to remove them, you can always just use, there's the remove button API, and if they don't have names, like this one I added here, this bar button, it doesn't have a name, but it's in the footer, and so it's at the index 1, so I can say like something like this, and it will remove that. Also, if I said panel set buttons to just an empty array, it should just wipe out all of them, because I'm setting the attribute here. So basically a lot more mutation and accessor support for your buttons, and it's really flexible. It allows you to register predefined buttons, like panel registers its predefined close button, and what's cool about the close button is that that it will automatically use text when rendered in the footer, but then if you and by default it wants to render in the header area, and when it renders in the header area, it uses the little X or close icon. So it's actually doing like an image replacement technique to hide the text and show the icon, and that's all done through CSS inside of the panel skins. But yeah, so this is a lot more flexible now, and hopefully will be much easier for people to create their customized panels with buttons and get the inherited defaults, or simply be able to say that they want to include the close button, and get its default configuration without having to like recreate it. This config also can work as an object with like sections, so you could say header and then have a header array of buttons like close. This will do the same thing. If I said footer here, it'll put it down there. So this is just to help, like if you had several buttons, and it just made sense to have them in separate objects or separate arrays like this. It's flexible for that.
So then, the preferred implementation then for creating instances of button, or for using the button modules, though, that has changed. There was somebody that asked a question in the forum the other day about the API changes from PR2 to PR4 about the button.getNode method.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's been, the button is now basically like a kind of its own little suite of components there. And there's three main ways.
Docs on it right now, right?
What's that?
There are rudimentary docs out on the staging site at this point.
Correct. Right? Yeah, there are. And so there's three main ways. There's the CSS buttons, which like I could come here and say button class equals YUI3 button, And then this is just for the style. And since I'm using panel here, and panel requires widget buttons, widget buttons require a CSS button to do the styling to make it look like this. Let's see.
And the CSS changed to support custom styling by just setting the background color. That was that in PR2 or is that new since then? Do you remember?
No, that was in PR2. So yeah. So if I do this, I would have thought because it's under the SAM skin. Oh, I need the 3. There we go. So yeah. So if you just include the YUI3 button class on an element and include the CSS button module, which is a CSS module, you'll get this styling for free. And this styling is actually done in such a way where I could come in here and say just very simple style rules, probably like what you'd want to set: background color, just the background color to I don't know, this will look hideous, but blue. What did I do wrong? Is blue not a color?
No, blue's a color. You have black ground color. Is it CSS button singular or CSS buttons plural for the module name?
It's singular. It is singular, I believe. Okay. That was a change. So now I just simply set a background color and a text color, and it still retains its like shape here, where it kind of looks 3D or pressable. And when I press it in, it does things, like the style changes. So this is really awesome. You can just include the CSS button module, add YUI3 button to anything. I mean, this could be a span, and it looked a little different because of just default styling on the text. It switched to serif, but
So, can you explain what's going on with the SAM skin versus the CSS button module? What styles are applied? If CSS button requires the SAM skin, or if there's something else?
Yeah, so it doesn't actually. So I bet if I move this out.
Oops. He dropped. So he moved it all the way out, yeah. So he should be joining up again in just a moment. And hopefully we'll get a chance after a quick look over the button API. Let me share my screen real quick. We'll look over at least the starting point of the where is it? Here it is, of the button API docs. So let's go into the user guides and widget button. There are far too many betas on that list. We need to remove some of those betas. But so we have the quick start section talking about button widgets and node plugin. Notice here what we're doing is we're like what Eric was doing when he was adding a button into the panel, calling plugin.button.create node. So this is the factory method. Starting using progressive enhancement, there's already this element, there's already this node on the page. So turning it into a button. And then the high and the low of it is that button, people expected button to work like a node, and now it does, because it is, buttons are, maybe Eric could correct me on this, but buttons are, for the most part, just decorated nodes. There's just some additional features on top of node instances. And so, welcome back.
Yeah, sorry, I had to connect, just crashed on me for some reason.
And there's the confirmation. CSS button singular is the name of that module, just to confirm what you were saying. So I'll let you take over sharing again for a moment, and then
Okay.
we'll spend a couple of minutes going over the stuff in data table. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, Andrew, for progress meter. You mean as far as the background colors and being able to restyle with just the setting of a background color, or did you have anything specific?
Yeah. So the way this is the way this happens to be working is so it's not actually even using any images, which is neat. It's using CSS3 gradients, and Internet Explorer has its own proprietary way to do gradients on elements. So it's using that, and they're basically semi-transparent gradients that are effectively adding just highlighting and shading to either the top and the bottom of the element. So that way it sits on top of whatever background color you provide. So if you give it like the background color purple, it'll be slightly lighter purple towards the top and slightly darker towards the bottom. So that makes it really flexible to just quickly and easily customize the style of the buttons to match like the theme of your application. And the style is applied just by adding YUI3 button to an element which you want to turn into a button. And then, like Luke was pointing out, that the button node plugin or the button plugin takes it a step further, where it helps you like create a new element if there isn't one that exists, and decorates it with some just a little extra features that are button specific, like being able to disable it and add a disabled class to it.
So and there was somebody that noted also that now if you create an instance of button, you do have to call render in order for it to create anything, right?
Yeah, so there's the plugin, which is the node-based, and then now Y.button is a widget-based button. So it behaves just like every other kind of widget. It inherits from widget, and extends the functionality of basically what the plugin does further. And that provides like the observable attribute changes. So if you care to know, for example, if the label of your button changes, then you probably want to use a widget, because it'll actually fire an event for when the label changes. Whereas the node plugin, just like nodes, they don't fire events like that by default, nor does the DOM. So if you change some attribute on an element via the DOM API, there's no event that's fired, and Node behaves that same way, because it's basically more performant. And and so that's where the widget basically takes it even a step further to give even more programmatic access and observability to changes. And then there's button group, which I guess I should be able to pull up an example of. So button group adds this idea of like a group of buttons that are related. So in this case, this will behave like checkboxes. So they maintain this selected state. Whereas this group here is radio buttons, so only one of them will remain selected. So this is a widget which is encapsulating these three buttons here, and works well for doing this sort of thing. So that's kind of the different levels. It's really like building up from just strictly styling and kind of a mini styling framework to make it easy for you to customize the background and text color of a button, then to being able to create them in JavaScript and being able to programmatically change things like disabled via JavaScript, to then going to a widget, which gives even more programmatic access.
Yeah, so hopefully that will be a lot more intuitive, a lot easier to get your head around than the implementation that was in PR2. And definitely we apologize for the churn in the API, but it's definitely good to get those ideas out there early and have have folks in the community that are banging on the preview releases and giving feedback like that. Otherwise, we end up pushing out the APIs that aren't so ideal instead of things that are much improved. So thank you, everyone, for all of your feedback as well.
The button being a node is a great thing, and the plugin is very useful at helping you create them. And I guess one other thing the plugin does, and so does the widget, is it adds the proper ARIA support to the buttons as well, which is very handy, just to get that.
Right, so if you have a span, it still reports from a screen reader as being a button, for example.
Yep. Well.
Cool. And tab support?
Well, it would tab like other elements. So let's see if I.
So you would have to.
I guess these are widgets, so they have the tab support.
Right. Yep.
So I was using my keyboard to select this.
Right on. Let me steal control back from you for the last few minutes. I want to go over the stuff in data table, the resolution of sorting and scrolling and that sort of stuff before we sign off. And again, just as a reminder, next week we'll be going over the examples in the new examples in 3.5.0. So let's see. All right, here we are, data table beta. Well, new data table beta, since it was beta before. I wonder why. And still maintaining the old one as deprecated version, but I guess that makes it alpha. I don't even know. Anyway, so so the user guide for data table, I've included a bunch of inline examples, so doing individual little snippets. So this is actually an instance of data table. And stealing from the idea that Button is using with the ability to style a background color, and I mimic that also in here. So I think I should be able to just hack this in real quick. Let's see, TH, I'm going to say background.
Yeah, this approach seems like something we should just do for everything in the SAM skin.
Yep. So same sort of thing. If you want to style at least for the headers, it's applied for the headers, that styling. So, so it goes into more depth about column configuration and empty cell value. This is a big change from, I don't remember if allow HTML came post PR2. I suspect it did, but by default, cell content is going to be HTML escaped. So unless you explicitly say it's okay for HTML to be in the cell content, then it's going to escape that HTML. So if you have data that you know is safe because it's all generated internally and it's stored in such a way that it's stored as numbers, for example, you can turn on allow HTML true on a column that isn't rendering HTML if you just want to skip the HTML escaping step. I doubt it would actually show up in any sort of performance. Oh, it was in PR2. Okay, cool. Thank you, Victor. So let's see. So we have the same stacked column headers, and the formatters and node formatters are the same. That functionality has changed, but now we have some example implementation of that. Let's get on towards some explanation about why the split between formatter and node formatter. Hopefully that'll make sense. And okay, some examples of using custom model instances and model list instances. So here, for example, creating a table that is using the pie list, and the pie list is in the documentation for model and model list. Actually, this was in the implementation, is in the user guide for model list. So just referencing that. But So PyList has a data sync layer in it, which means that we can just call load on the data property being the model list instance. I just exposed that as a public property. In 3.6, I'm very likely, if not almost dead certain, to just implement a table.load, and that table.load is just going to pass into the model list's load method. So it'll just be passed through. If you don't want to do this, it'll just be table.load. But I definitely have a bias towards APIs existing on the object instances themselves, so to simplify everything instead of having to go through namespaces and things. So break down the different ways to get remote data. So either using the data source plugin, which exists still and continues to work, so all of the various ways that you were getting remote data or data from function data source or IO data source, XHR data or XML data source, or the various different data sources. And so you can plug in the things you can add plugins to your data sources like data source JSON schema. In 3.6, I'm looking to add a configuration or a module that will allow you to specify configuration for a data source type, source, and resulting schema and those sorts of things in the data table constructor, and that would pass through into likely into a model sync layer or model list sync layer. So implementation on the model list that would be dynamically generated for you. But so the breakdown of the modules that are in data table, the one thing that I didn't do a great deal of detail about is describing the class relationship between the data table class itself, the data table instance itself, and the views that it creates for rendering out the header and the body and the footer. By default, there's no footer view, but you can specify a footer view if you want to render it out, and it supports it out of the box. But now we have table messages are added back in here, and this is actually internationalizable. So you can add a lang pack for, currently it only supports these two. It only supports these two messages, but anything else you pass into show message, you can pass HTML into here, and that's what's going to display in there as well. In 3.6, I'm going to be changing this, on the implementation of this, to be using a separate view, and that view is then, you'll then be able to configure that view, so you can specify an override view for the message such that it's creating like a modal overlay or something like that, instead of this is currently implemented as a separate T-body. But having that configurable, I think, would be a win. Column width configuration is in place. I think that was in for PR2. And there's more description about how to deal with absolute column widths, where you get truncated data, or the table I'm sorry, or the cell data is too wide to fit in the configured width, and so it expands the column instead of truncating it. Or if the table width is too narrow, then it will shrink this width down based on being able to support displaying the data in the columns. We're running out of time. We have a staff meeting in just a minute or so, but so a big thing that changed as far as the UI is concerned is for sorting. We added a double arrow, and there's now keyboard support. I'm actually hitting the keyboard now, and there's also multi-column support for sorting. You can do that either by the API or by shift-clicking on column headers. And
that's fancy.
Yeah, so that's a lot cleaner, I think. If the new arrows offend you, let me know. And the column alignments, you can have scrolling and I don't have an example for scrolling. Scrolling and sorting work together. The column widths are synced properly now. Otherwise, I'll talk a little bit about the implementation.
For you to do that.
What's that?
I just remember it being a big pain in the ass for you to get the column widths on scrolling data tables to work right.
Yeah, not a period of my life that I want to recreate. So the reason that this is, so the scroll bar here looks like it's leaking out is just because the page is zoomed, because we start getting into fractional pixels. And I'd love to talk about the implementation of how the scrolling is actually working, but at this point we have a staff meeting to go to. So, but the go into detail about the column configurations. So those are all detailed out. So when you're specifying a column, these are all the different configs that you can put in there, and also details about another appendix for, there it is. So formatter arguments, what they do, an example of what they look like, and similar for node formatters. And now we're a minute over, and we've got to get running. So we're going to close out, and next week, again, we'll be talking about the new examples in 3.5.0, and thanks, everyone, for joining, and we will talk to you again next week. And everyone, please test out PR4. All right. See you guys later.